Hiya, I'm Louis, and this is the new Behringer CMD LC-1 controller, which is a little modular MIDI controller aimed at DJs. I've had it for a little while now, and I thought I'd put out a little video that sort of tells you what I think of it. Right, so we've got 8 encoders, 8 buttons with 2 different LED colours. Then we've got a whole load of sort of clip launching buttons, which have 8 different colour states, 4 different colours, and then we have another 3 rows of buttons, which are also 2 colours. The knobs are endless encoders rather than sort of regular pots, which means they turn forever. They don't have a physical maximum and minimum value. And around them they've got these little LED position indicators. So if you are using them to control something which has a maximum or minimum value, rather than looking on the knob and seeing a little bit of physical plastic that shows you where the knob is positioned, you would send MIDI data back to the controller, and it would light up one of these lights around it, depending on the MIDI data that you sent to the controller. I really like these position indicators because when you're using encoders, I think you get this sort of detached feeling because the actual encoder doesn't quite match up with the pot, the sort of fake pot in the software. And so having this little LED position indicator makes it much easier for you to sort of look at it and work out exactly where it is in relation to what's going on in the software. One thing that's worth mentioning is that this plate here, unlike the rest of the unit, is a glossy black plastic, and as a result it can pick up fingerprints and it shows dust quite a lot, which it doesn't look too bad, but it might annoy you if you want your gear to look super clean and pretty all the time. The buttons are of the hard plastic variety, and they've got quite a firm action with very little travel, and they click quite satisfyingly when pressed, which means it's very easy to tell when you've pressed them. I've never found myself accidentally triggering them without intending to, but on the flip side, because they're quite firm, I have occasionally tried to press it and been a bit light and not actually triggered it, although with time this has sort of gone away, largely just because I've adapted to it, although I wonder if over time the buttons will sort of break in and get softer. But either way, it's not really an issue, it's just something that I had to adapt to. Being firm plastic buttons, you're not going to get the same sort of tactility and playability as you do on things like the DJ Tech Tools MIDI Fighter or the Ableton Push or anything. It's definitely more suited just for launching a clip rather than mapping them to notes and trying to play instruments or drums on it. Although you definitely you could do some simplistic cue point stuff, but you're not going to be doing your finger drumming per se. While I was testing this controller, I mapped it to control cue points in Xwax, and I got a bit carried away and I was bashing the buttons, and I noticed afterwards that there were some slight marks in the surface of the buttons, and so I sort of wondered actually how easy is it to sort of mark and damage them in a cosmetic fashion, and I gave it a little scratch in each of them, and you can't really notice it on these ones, but on these ones with a little sort of black finish on them, it's actually really quite easy to deliberately scratch it off. It doesn't change how it feels or anything, but again, it's a cosmetic issue. If you want something to look really pretty, you're going to want to make sure that you don't scratch your nails across it. The coolest bit about this controller, at least in my opinion, is probably the LEDs, because they're very pretty and you get lots of colours, and I think that's great for sort of because it's quite a blank slate controller with a very sort of nondescript layout. Well, it looks like an Ableton clip launching thing, but you could map it to anything, and so to compensate for the fact that it's quite nondescript and there's not it's not split into chunks, so if I want these buttons to be cue points and these buttons to be loops, I can easily differentiate between them by going, okay, well I'll just make these ones blue and I'll make these ones pink, etc, etc. There is some small amount of colour bleed, so for example, if you've got a blue light here and an amber light here, but these are both green, there will be slightly different shades just because the blue seeps into the green. but it's not an issue. You can still very easily differentiate between the different colors. You can tell what they're supposed to be. The LEDs are nice and bright, and all the colors look really nice. You're not going to have any trouble differentiating between the different colors, even in quite a brightly lit room. And in a dark environment, there are two different brightness settings. So if you're in a very dark room and you think, oh, it's a bit too bright because it's a bit like staring at a light bulb, I suppose, you can just turn it to the slightly darker setting, and that's good. It would have been nice if we could have had more control over how bright the LEDs were, because currently you've got a choice between a color, the flashing color, or just turning them off completely in the case of these. It would have been nice if we could have had, a dim blue, a middle blue, and then a bright blue, and sort of mix things up that way, or perhaps to have control two different colors, so I can turn on the blue and the green and mix them together. The case is made out of a rigid plastic with a thin metal faceplate on the top, although this metal faceplate is purely cosmetic. It's only a millimeter or two thick, so all of the actual strength comes from plastic, but that's not an issue. It feels sturdy, it doesn't flex, it definitely feels like it's strong enough for you to pick up and throw in your backpack to take to a gig or wherever. On the back here we have two things, a Type B USB port and a little Kensington lock. So there's no power supply, which means that it's entirely bus powered, which I think is great. Although if you want the option of plugging in a power supply, you're kind of stuffed. You have to use the bus powered. And one thing to know is that this little metal faceplate here, on two of the units I've got, has actually come away slightly from the case, which is how I can tell that it's only 2 millimeters or so thick. It's not an issue, because you can just push it back down into place. But it is another little cosmetic feature which might annoy you. One thing I really like about this controller are these rubber feet on the bottom, because they are absolutely huge, and they're really securely attached, which means that the controller doesn't slip on the surface so easily, and I don't think that the feet are going to fall off, unlike they do on a lot of other controllers I've tried. One really interesting feature about the CMD controllers is this metal plate on the back, which I've not seen on any other controllers before. It allows you to unscrew it, and then you can shift it across, and then you can screw it back onto another CMD controller, effectively turning two modules into one joined controller. There we go. It's fairly solid. There's a little wobble in it, but they stay together. For scale, here it is next to a 15-inch laptop and a pretty standard turntable. As you can see, it sits a lot shorter than the turntable, so currently, if you're going to use it next to a turntable or a standard sort of club mixer, you're going to need something to put under it so it sits at the same level. I'm using a book, which is not really the best solution. It would be really nice if Behringer could come up with a case like Native Instruments has for the X1, which, while also containing the controller and protecting it, you can also use it as a little stand to bring it up to the appropriate height. The way Midi works on this device is all nice and simple. The buttons globally have two modes. The first one, which is the default, is a momentary mode. So you press the button and it sends a note at full velocity, and you release it and it sends the note off. The other one is a toggle mode. So you press it, it sends the note on. You press it again, it sends the note off. The encoders can also be switched between two modes. The first one being your normal relative binary offset sort of thing, which you turn it one way or the other, and all it does is tell the software that it is turning one way or the other, but it doesn't send an absolute value. The other mode for the encoders is an absolute CC mode, in which the encoders emulate regular pots and have a maximum and minimum value, and they send out a particular point somewhere in the range. I found the absolute mode felt kind of odd, because unlike with regular pots, you don't have that physical maximum point, which meant it became really vital for you to have that LED feedback. You kind of needed to look at the LEDs to be able to tell where you were and what it is you were doing. Rather than always having the software control the LEDs, if you're not really bothered, you can also get the hardware to control the LEDs themselves. So all you do is you send a Midi SysX message to set it into that particular mode, and then it behaves like so. When you press a button, it goes blue when you send the note on, and it returns to amber when you send the note off. Now the encoders have two different behaviors depending on whether you got it on relative or absolute mode. In relative mode, a light flashes to show you which direction you're turning the LED, which in my opinion is completely pointless. However, in absolute mode, you get these position indicators, which are absolutely vital to their use in my opinion, because you need to be able to see where the pots are. Controlling the different LEDs is actually really quite easy. All you have to do is send the notes of the button that you want to change back to the button itself, and then different velocities correspond with different colours. So it's all very simple. The same sort of thing happens for the encoders. You send the same note back, and the first 15 velocities correspond with the 15 LEDs here. One disadvantage of this device is that the firmware isn't very flexible. For example, all the buttons and the encoders have fixed MIDI values. You can't say, for example, change what note this button sends, and you can't make it so that maybe it sends the same note, but it sends a different velocity. You can't change any of these things at all. And also, all of the different modes, for example, you can't have this one as a momentary and this one as a toggle. You have to have every single button as momentary or every single button as toggle, which means that if you want to do this kind of thing, you need to do it within your software, which is fine if you're using things like Tractor, because they've got a very good system for that. But if you're using maybe Ableton Live, you're going to have to start doing some scripting, or you're going to have to find some middleware to put in the middle of it, which makes things a lot more difficult. On the other hand, because it's very simple in this way, you can't really screw it up, or at least I don't think you could. You might find a way. And it also means there's no proprietary piece of software that you need to be able to edit the settings. Everything's done by the standard MIDI SysX messages, which is great because if you are in future using an operating system which the software which doesn't exist didn't support, you'll be screwed. Say like if you're using this further down the line and you're using Windows, I don't know, 10 or something, you'll still be able to edit all the settings within the hardware, even though the software doesn't exist for that. And speaking of software, with these controllers you will get bundled a version of Decadence LE, which I've not tried out because I don't have a copy, but it does look really cool. There's a whole bunch of things in it, like non-linear macro knobs, which make it look like it's at least worth trying out. So yeah, go and test that out as well. Oh, and in addition to that, you also get a 3-year manufacturer's warranty with this device. So if you look at this device, saw the name, Behringer, I'm a bit worried about it breaking, well, you don't have to worry about that so much, because first, it does feel like a nicely made device. I don't think this is going to break, but I could be wrong. But with that 3-year warranty, you shouldn't really care so much because it's a cheap device and you have 3 years in which if it breaks you can send it back and get it replaced. So that's more or less all my thoughts about the hardware. I think it's a great controller overall, particularly if you're a person who is interested in making MIDI mappings for various software and getting a controller and really making it do what you want it to do. Although I'm told there will be mappings for Traktor and Ableton and all the usual actually bundled with the controller when you buy it. So yeah, for the price, which I think is $129 US, you can't really go wrong with it. I think it's a really nice little controller, and I hope we will get to see more small modular style devices from all companies in future.